So what I decided we would do is do something I'm actually doing with the students in the Florida School of Discipleship right now, which is address the question of whether God's an imaginary being. I don't know if you know this, but many people believe the idea that God is not a being that's out there that you worship, but God is a projection of your imagination that you strongly desire, and so you create this God. This is not something sophisticated. Very bright skeptics, they don't utilize this argument, and I'm going to show you why. But many non-professional, kind of amateur skeptics online and in our daily lives, you run this all the time. Just to give you a couple of personal examples, about a year and a half ago, and Ken saw some of the email exchanges of this, he can tell you, I don't know why I pointed you like I needed verification, like I'm lying. But anyway, I mean, he was involved in this. There was a gentleman that was really going through a crisis of faith. He'd come to one of our Wednesday nights and was expecting to see pastor, and I don't know what happened to him. He must have just, maybe he stubbed his toe or something. But he walked out when he saw it was me instead of pastor up there, and then he started to walk out, and then he came in and said, "I'll just give him a little hearing," and it was on why I trust the Bible. So that started a conversation with this guy who was ready to leave the faith. All of his friends were non-believers. They had been raised in Christian homes in Chicago. They were non-believers, and he was part of a massive church split, a Presbyterian church off of McGregor Road. So he was really disillusioned with the church. He didn't want to do anything with the church and was ready to leave the faith. So we had this conversation. And at one point in the conversation in my office, he said, "Well, I mean, all this stuff, what if it's just made up?" I said, "It's possible. It's not a good argument. It's possible." He's like, "Possible?" I said, "Yeah, it's possible the whole thing's made up." I said, it's also possible that this reality we experience is something like in the Matrix, and you're going to wake up in a little bit. I mean, we're not talking about possible. What's probably true, not possibly true. Well, he mentioned it again in the conversation, and then later he brought it up in an email exchange where he's like, "I think this is," and he just basically sounded like one of these older skeptics that said this sort of thing, that I think God is an imaginary figure, and he said the old, like the Easter Bunny. Fast forward, that was about a year and a half ago. About 7 months ago, I'm having a dialogue with a guy trying to deconvert me from right up the road here. My friend up the road, the atheist up the road, and we're in the Plex in the conference room, does the same thing. If I had to give you my thoughts on God, I'd have to say God is the greatest idea man has ever brought forth to control human beings. So the humans imagine God to control other people, and that was his take on this. So I thought we would go over this and start with today. So let me ask you this. How would you deal with something like this? Let's say somebody comes back from college or somebody comes back from a job scenario and they say, "I think God's imaginary. He's not hidden in an invisible friend. He's an imaginary friend. He's not a real friend. He's an imaginary one." Anybody, where do you think you'd begin a conversation like that? Do you have any idea where you'd begin in a conversation about God's a made-up thing because of his hiddenness? Okay, good, excellent. That's it, right? Just what we've talked about, right? Well, why do you think that, and what evidence led you to believe this? Something like this? Very good, excellent. Yeah, go ahead. Right, you just reverse it back, right? You say, okay, yeah, there's good psychological reasons for you to deny a God, just like there's good psychological reasons for me to affirm a God. Mike? Okay. Oh, yeah, we'll get the microphone again. So how do they know what they know? Okay, yeah, all right. Anybody else? Yeah, come right here.
I think we showed it in this class.
Yes.
On the precision of the world.
There you go.
So
Right.
Exactly. Everything it works together.
Yeah, that seems to be good evidence for a higher power, even if I can't see him. Very good. Excellent. See, Jesus, Santa Claus for grown-ups. Alex wanted to comment if you want to run at Elizabeth or not. Look nice this morning. So everybody does. That wasn't just everybody does. No one left out. Go ahead.
We were kind of atheists you and I hang out with. I asked him a question: why do you spend most of your time talking about your imaginary friend?
Yes, that's right. Imaginary, exactly. Alex is saying when you meet somebody who thinks is an imaginary person, they spend a lot of time getting angry at this imaginary person, trying to get rid of this imaginary person, railing away at this imaginary person. Go ahead, Sammy.
As a matter of fact, I met a guy yesterday who said, "I'm an atheist." So I said, okay, let's talk about it. The pH is a measure of acidity or alkalinity in the body.
Yes.
So I told him all your fluids in the body are exactly at 6.5. Mm-hmm. Who made it?
Right.
Number one. Number two, gravity, temperature. If
Yes.
the Earth ever move in a different orbit, 1 or 2 inches away,
Yes.
the entire galaxy
Yes.
could go into destruction.
Yes.
Number three, the shell of the Earth itself is 35 miles. If it had been 36, it would have screwed up gravity.
Yes.
And just get to the point. Okay, who did all of this?
Yes. Sammy says jump right past those motivations. Go right for evidence. I love that. Go right past it, right? And go for it. I do want to let you know that this is intended to intimidate you. Because of God's hiddenness, if I can call you a name, you're gullible, irrational, superstitious, and stupid, then you, right? Simply because God isn't detectable like a chair for very good reasons or a podium, then I can say it's akin to other superstitions and mythologies. So here's how we're going to do this. There's a general claim, and it's this. God is created out of your imagination. That's the general overarching claim. It comes in different particular forms. So a particular form would be, I think your belief in God's like your belief in Santa Claus, right? So I've actually had a skeptic sing this to me. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake, right? And like I was telling the FSOD students, that the difference between God and Santa is very, very little for them, right? And we don't believe in Santa when we become mature, non-gullible adults, right? So Santa may leave a lump of coal in your stocking, but God sends you to hell and you become the coal if you defy him. So did he make a hell joke? That's horrible. That's okay. We're going to get through it. So it reminds me, I can't remember if it was Augustine said, what was God doing before creation? He said creating hell for people that ask questions like that. But anyway, so we're going to talk about this. We're going to start with the particular claim. I'm going to show you its pedigree, where it came from. And I also want you to know why sophisticated people that think very, very deeply and reflectively and debate on this subject never run the God is imaginary argument. Never. Because it makes them vulnerable to things, so they don't ever run this. They run other types of arguments, arguments like coherence arguments. They try to say some of the omnis don't sit well together. They'll run that way, or say, well, there's just not enough evidence for God, so more like an agnostic. Even though I'm very angry at this God for not existing. So we're going to look at this and look at the particular claim up front. If this is on, and I think that it is. Good. Okay, let me give you how it's stated by some of its strongest advocates. This is one of the best-known European skeptics. He's a French philosopher named Michael Onfray. He's better known than Richard Dawkins in some quarters. Okay, so I'm going to read this section from Onfray. Listen. A fiction, he's talking about your belief and my belief in a higher power, does not die. An illusion never passes away. A fairy tale does not refute itself. You cannot kill a breeze, a wind, a fragrance. You cannot kill a dream or an ambition. God, listen, manufactured by mortals in their own quintessential image, fifth essence image, exists only to make daily life bearable, despite the path that every one of us treads towards extinction. We cannot assassinate or kill an illusion. In fact, illusion is more likely to kill us, for God puts to death everything that stands up to him, beginning with reason, intelligence, and the critical mind. All the rest follows in a chain reaction. This is a devastating paragraph where he's saying, belief in God's imaginary, here's why you manufacture the belief, and it's so common to human beings, and it destroys anything that gets in his way, like critical thinking, intelligence, and reason. One of Pastor's favorite authors is actually Ayn Rand. I don't know if you ever read Atlas Shrugged. It's one of Pastor's favorite novels. She struggled. She was an atheist for a while, came out of communism, hated communism, hated its stifling economic power over people. So she was a big free market person. But she also didn't believe in God because she came out of that Soviet system that systematically expunged God from everything, literature, education, family life, that sort of thing. She flirted with agnosticism near the end of her life. But listen to Ayn Rand here. That dark, incoherent passion within you, which you take as the voice of God or of your glands, is nothing more than the corpse of your mind. That's Ayn Rand, right? Listen to this other quote by her as well. Raise this God over the earth, this God whom men have sought since they came into being, this God who will grant them joy, peace, and pride, this God, in this one word, I. Humans create the higher power. Carl Sagan, one of the best-known astronomers in very, very popular, a lot of work done. PBS fell in love with this guy as a scientist because he had a particular disdain for religion, especially Christianity. Carl Sagan, it is said that men may not be the dreams of gods, but rather the gods are dreams of men. The progenitor of this is this gentleman who gets most disgusting beard award for this morning, Ludwig Feuerbach. Feuerbach lived in the 19th century, about early 1800, and I think he died in 1872. Feuerbach originated the idea that God was an imaginary figure, that God somehow was something that humans manufactured. Listen to Feuerbach here. The divine being's nothing else than the human being. That's all. He had a gentleman follow him, a German psychoanalyst, the best known, Sigmund Freud. Listen to Freud here. It would be very nice if there were a God who created the world and was a benevolent providence overseeing the world, and if there were a moral order in the universe and an afterlife, but it is a very striking fact that all this is exactly as we are bound to wish it to be. The Future of an Illusion. You get a lot of Freud's thoughts in two books in particular, The Future of an Illusion and The Totem and Taboo, two main books that express in most strident terms his views on religion. Erich Fromm, very, very well-known psychologist. Listen to Fromm. God is not a symbol of power over man, but of man's own powers. And probably the most known version of this comes from Karl Marx. Karl Marx. Listen to Marx here. He said, religion is the opiate or the drug of the people. So, he viewed human beings as economic creatures. So he said the worst part about organized religion, especially Christianity, is it gives you an afterlife idea that makes you complacent with your bad conditions here. You understand what he's saying? So the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, those are terms of the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots feel complacent because there's an afterlife, right? And they won't rise up against the haves and take what's rightfully theirs. So he hated religion. He said religion puts people into it's a human created illusion, delusion. A delusion comes from you and illusion comes from outside of you. A human created delusion that helps you feel better about something but lulls you into apathy, right? He actually didn't originate this. He kind of got this from reading Nietzsche and a number of other 19th century philosophers. Okay? So the particular claim is not the general claim. The particular claim is, okay, God's imaginary, like what? Like Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, Leprechaun, Santa Claus. Okay? And that's what we're going to deal with this morning, is the particular claim. What do you do when somebody tries to make this parallel? This is a particularly interesting subject for me because that's what I spent all the years of my doctoral dissertation doing, was comparing and contrasting, what they're called parallel claims, assessing parallel claims. We look at this figure that did this. Is this more like Jesus or less like him? And can we say that if it's enough like Jesus, that this was a possible inspiration for the gospel authors? So this is the same sort of thing, parallel claims. So someone's making a parallel claim, and they say this: just like human beings should abandon the Santa idea when they come of age, so humans, when they get capable of evidence-based, mature thinking, should abandon the God idea. I think we've even had people in this class that their family members tell them this church has brainwashed them, which is another version of this argument. Do you understand what I'm saying? That this is they brainwash you into believing something you wouldn't normally believe on your own, a superstition. So we're going to look at this very, very quickly and go at least with 4 different moves when you hear somebody make this parallel claim. Okay, 4 different moves when somebody makes this parallel claim. So if someone says the God idea is more like the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, just keep in mind this. This is a common mistake made when people make parallel claims. The technical term is called the fallacy of the undistributed middle. Now, that's a mouthful of a term. It just means this. Don't think that because something has one thing in common, it has everything in common. Okay? Right? Because you can make a parallel claim of anything. Right? An elephant has ears, Mulvihill has ears, Mulvihill's a pachyderm. That's a bad parallel, right? So what you want to do is distribute, not leave undistributed, distribute all the middle terms of differences. Any parallel claim has to assess similarities and differences, okay? So what you look at is not just how they're similar. I can't see Santa. He rewards me for good works. He doesn't reward me. He punishes me for bad. And he is someone that inspires young people. Okay, similarities. Well, there are differences as well, massive differences. So the one thing when you're making a parallel claim is to understand that just because something has 2 things or 3 things in common doesn't mean it has everything in common. And even if it has a number of things, a high percentage of things in common, it doesn't mean one led from the other, right? Or one came from the other. So the first is we don't want to commit a fallacy. A fallacy is a fancy term for saying a mistake so common it gets its own name. A mistake in thinking so common it gets its own name. Okay, so we're going to look first is say, so when in a conversation, how would this work out? You can say, well, isn't it true that whenever you're making any parallel claim, you have to assess differences and similarities? Now, anybody that knows anything will say, yeah, well, yeah. I said, but that way you can make a parallel between me and anything, right? I mean, I have 2 appendages. An airplane has 2 appendages. Mulvihill's an airplane. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? It has 2. So you see what I'm talking about? So you can, unless you distribute the differences, you're going to make a false parallel. Understand? Again, that was my whole PhD, was taking these mythological figures from other supercultures and saying, are they more similar to Jesus or dissimilar? And because anybody can make anything a parallel claim by just sitting on the similarities, right? Pastor Betzer loves Jesus. Joe Mulvihill loves Jesus. Joe really is just a symbol for Pastor Betzer. You see what I'm talking about? You can do any of these things. So you assess not, when you make a parallel claim, you assess differences and similarities. Differences and similarities, okay? Any question about this, just as a kind of a preliminary level one beginner to a discussion like this? Any questions at all? That seems easy to get, but some people, I actually had a girl when I was teaching this at Mount Perrin run out of the room, 17-year-old, screaming. Right at this point. She's like, he told me there's no Santa. She still believed in Santa at 17. So if anybody's in here and still holds on to the Santa belief, somebody, you can get with somebody, they can pray with you in the back, give them a couple of donuts. Well, there's no Santa. I don't want to, man. Sorry, everybody. Oh, no, maybe there is. Oh, wait. Oh, gosh. Okay, yes. Oh, did you have something to add? Go for it. Yeah. Yes. Right. Might. Notice the end of that. Might be one. Not or likely, but it doesn't mean it automatically is, right? Because it could be that somebody's just walking and talking and they're not really a duck. So, yeah, it just means that, yeah, all things considered, if they have a lot of similarities, you may think there's a connection between them, right? But that doesn't mean that automatically there's a connection between them. Very, very good. Anybody else? Okay, let's move to the next. So let's look at a couple of major differences between Santa, the Santa mythology, and God belief. Here's a major one. People don't come to a life-changing, evidence-based belief in Santa late in life. And I wanted to put up for you 3 of what we would consider the best thinkers in Europe and America that came to a life-changing belief in Santa, God, late in life. Nobody does that, right? So here's a major difference. If the God belief were like the Santa belief, you'd see a number of people that came to a life-changing, life-altering, evidence-based belief in Santa in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. You don't see that. With the God belief, you do see that. And I wanted to include people we've talked about in here before. Antony Flew is this gentleman down here to the right. He's dead now, the late Antony Flew. I believe he died in 2008 during the real estate recession. Antony Flew was the most philosophically astute atheist. Contributed to debates, dozens of books against God, the belief in God. He thought Christianity was superstitious for superstitious and gullible people. Antony Flew had a life-changing belief in God based on evidence in his 70s. Said there were 3 things in particular that changed his mind. Some of the things Sammy was talking about, the fine-tuning, first life, and the beginning of the universe. Those 3 things started getting him going. He goes, the most reasonable explanation for those things is a higher power. He didn't die a Christian, but he died a believer. He was investigating Christianity and died a believer in a higher power. This gentleman to your right is a guy named A.N. Wilson. A.N. Wilson, said by some to be one of the brightest literary minds in America in the last 50 years. A.N. Wilson, A.N. Wilson. I believe his first name's Adrian Wilson. Wilson was born into a Christian family. I think he had ministers in his family. Left the faith for years and then came back in his 50s. I don't know if I've ever told you this. I collect conversion stories. I love them. People that convert out and convert to a real belief, not just a social belief in Christianity. W.H. Auden is another one. C.S. Lewis, remember the most reluctant convert in all of England? C.S. Lewis converted out in his 40s. So again, you see a major difference here between the Santa belief and the God belief in that you have older people, not young, gullible kids being told things by their parents, that come to a life-altering, evidence-based belief in God. You don't have that happen with Santa. Two, there's no evidence for the mythological Santa. Now, somebody might catch me and go, what about the historic St. Nicholas? Well, go on our YouTube page and look at William Federer's 1 hour long Santa address. It's really, really quite interesting over the years. But there's no evidence for mythological Santa, and there's all sorts of evidences for higher power. I'm going to give you 4 real quick ones here because we're doing this in a summary style. But this is another difference between the God belief and the Santa belief. So there may be similarities in that conceptually. Santa is someone who morally assesses you. God morally assesses you, right? But there are differences as well. For example, Santa does not enjoy these sort of arguments. Design arguments, right? Cosmological arguments, consciousness, freedom, rationality arguments, morality, and value arguments. These arguments do point to the idea of a higher power being more likely existent than not, being more plausible than their denial. What does that mean? To deny that God makes better sense of these things takes more belief, more strength of belief than it does to believe that a being, a super ordering intellect, a mind out there did these sort of things. Santa doesn't enjoy this kind of evidence. Okay? Santa doesn't enjoy this kind of evidence. Maybe the main thing, though, is this, and this is a little bit difficult to explain, but we'll end or wind it down here and take some questions. What you want in an explanation is power to cover what's being asked. So in any good explanation, what you want is something that the power of the explanation to cover what the question is getting at, right? That's called explanatory power. Explanatory power. So let's think for a moment about why kids abandon a belief in Santa Claus. Why do they abandon it? Right here. Okay, now, but how do they come to disbelieve in Santa? Maybe a friend tells them. What do you think? Okay, friend told you. There you go. Okay, so they told you it was your parent, right? Yeah, go ahead.
They see Dad pulling off the Santa suit.
They see Dad pulling off the Santa suit. Anybody else? Right? Yes.
I grew up in New York City, and we had 50 holes. So we just used to watch our parents put stuff under the tree.
We had a biology teacher at our old school, Chris and I, named Justin Nelson. And he said he always had a real strongly analytic mind. And Justin would say, there's just no way you can cover that many miles on a sleigh. I don't care if it's superpowered sleigh. And in a less than 12-hour period and with the shifting sun, I mean, he went that way, and that's why he came. But here's the thing. We get a better explanation. Don't forget. Why do you move off the Santa belief? You get a better explanation that replaces the old one. What's the question? Where did the presents come from? Okay? What's the question with God? Where did all this come from? What's it all for? When the Santa belief gets ejected, it's because a better explanation, Dad did it, replace it. Mom did it. With atheism, we're not getting a better explanation. Who did all this and what's life for? Nothing and nobody. For nothing. That's not an explanation at all. Do you see the difference? Us moving away from the Santa belief is because we have a better, more rational explanation that what? Addresses the evidence. You don't have that when atheism is attempted or naturalism is attempted to replace the God belief. It doesn't have explanatory power. So here's the idea, okay? So imagine you have a situation where Mom comes to Johnny and goes, Johnny, actually, you know what? Let's just do biography real quick. It was actually devastating to me to learn about Santa not being existent. My parents came to me at 10 years old and said, there's no Santa. And I went, well, there's an Easter bunny. And I was like, no, it's not that either, not a big bunny. And I said, well, I've got proof of the tooth fairy, so you can try that. But I know the tooth fairy. I put the money comes, and no. So yeah, I'm a hard-headed person. So I fought Mom on it, and eventually was overcome. But imagine my parents said this. I said, so who put the presents under the tree? And they're like, was it you guys? And they're like, no, actually no one did it. They popped into existence for no purpose out of nothing. You know, listen, it'd be more rational for me to go back to Santa. At least Santa's a person that has plans and purposes and can interact with me. You understand what I'm saying? It would be more rational for me to go back to the Santa belief than the belief the presents appeared fully formed just for me at just the right time under the tree. Well, that's what we're dealing with the arguments for God. The universe, the planets, the star, all these things just happen to work out. A fortuitous accident. Right? We're a lucky set of hominids that just come to evolve along. That's not an answer at all. Okay? So the point is this. When the Santa belief gets removed, it's because a new, better explanation comes in. When it comes to a better explanation for God's existence, nothing and no one is not a better explanation. Just like it wouldn't be for the presents under the tree. So another difference between Santa belief and God belief is when the Santa belief gets removed, it's because there's a better explanation that matches the data. You don't get that with atheism. You don't get that with naturalism. It's utterly unacceptable as far as a substitute, what they call a substitute hypothesis. So with I'm working out some things. Did Santa Claus put the presents under the tree? Did maybe leprechauns put presents under the tree? Maybe the Easter Bunny filled in for Santa. He had a night off. And then there's my parents. And then there's this last one that no one, nowhere, for no purpose did it. Wait, nothing did it? You know what? Let's think about leprechauns a little. So at least you have at least a framework to make sense of some of these things. So the point is this. The last point is that what you're trying to do with an explanation is explain, you've got a question about some event or things in the world, right? And that's what you're doing with the Santa hypothesis. You're talking about the presents in Christmas time. Well, the God hypothesis, when it doesn't get replaced with anything like a better explanation, it's actually not an explanation at all. So if someone had to choose between Santa put them there and no one put them there, you're actually better off to go with the Santa explanation, right? The no one put them there. They just sort of they just worked out every year. They just, we kind of went to sleep. We wake up and there they are. So the point here is basically something like this. If you're going to give us some alternative for theism, that's the idea of a higher power, then try to replace it with something better than what theism does with the evidence. Don't just say nothing, no one, nowhere. That's not ever going to be a satisfactory explanation for anybody that thinks. This is precisely why we used to not respect skeptics. We used to call them village idiots. I know you don't like calling names, but we didn't go, ooh, he doesn't believe. We say, what an idiot. Look at all this. Doesn't believe? When missionaries used to go into other cultures and tell them, some of our wise men, they don't think there's any higher power, no supernatural, no metaphysical. They'd all start laughing like they heard a joke. Who do they think made the trees and the stars? Those don't look like they just happened. Well, they just think it just happened. And they were the primitives, right? So the idea here is what we want is an explanation that is at least powerful enough to explain the data. And saying there is no explanation and there is no one doesn't explain the data at all. It's dodging an explanation. I thought you'd like this little cartoon. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm just too old to believe that someone's responsible for the gifts. I think they all got here by chance. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm just too old to believe someone's responsible for creation. I think they got here by chance. So you see what I'm talking about? The whole Santa thing is a way. It's just a clever way to call you a name, really. And if somebody really is entertaining the idea that God is more like Santa than he's not like Santa, they really haven't thought through the issue at all. Okay? Now, in Hebrews 11, it says what? It says, we have to, what? To have faith in God, we have to believe he exists, and he's a rewarder of those that earnestly seek him. There's so much packed into that verse. Earnestly seek him. So Bible assumes God's hiddenness and that there's a seeking, that there will be some part of discovery, right, in this sort of thing. You're not going to get it all worked out like a blueprint. But that means that the Bible assumes that you would know what? General revelation, that there's at least a higher power. Romans 1 says it. Psalm 19 says it. It's part and parcel of what we're looking at. This particular claim, is part of a general claim that says God's imaginary, but it kind of takes that general notion in people and says, well, it's not really real. It's not worth talking about, right? Now, here's the problem. You know, any good, potent lie needs some truth, right? Did you know that? The more potent the lie, the more truth it has in it. It just gets twisted in a separate way. Are human beings prone to creating divine beings just to manipulate people and in their own image? Yes. Yes, they are. The Bible calls it what? Idolatry. The Bible calls it polytheism. Take most of the supercultures in the ancient world. Their polytheism looks like a bunch of squabbling family members at a family reunion. Hermes, Zeus, Aphrodite, they're sleeping with one another, they're doing things with one another. In other words, yes, human beings can fashion invisible beings just to express themselves and paint their thoughts onto the divine canvas, right? Does Christianity fall prey to that? That's what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. I don't think so. But yes, it is certainly true that human beings can what? Create gods in their own image that end up looking just like them. One last point. Oh, 10:24. When somebody says, I'm religious, or I'm spiritual, not religious, right? Or I'm a seeker after God, but I'm not really into organized religion. One of the most dangerous things about that is when you go looking for a God with no parameters, it ends up looking just like you. You go looking for a God that you kind of mix and match like a salad bar religion. You end up getting a God that's likely not the real God. Why? Because it looks just like you up in the sky. It has all your thoughts all the time, right? That's why people that say they're spiritual, not religious, or they're not into organized religion, never feel convicted. That's a surefire sign that you're not creating your God. If there's no conviction, that God always rubber stamps everything you do because it's just you, right? So the whole idea that you're on a spiritual quest is mean you're going to try to find God regardless of how it affects you, right? So when you go on a spiritual quest, one of the worst things you can do is not try to include truth and evidence. If it's just the way it makes you feel, you will fashion a God in your own image and worship that, which is just worshiping a bigger you. Okay? Question or comment? Go ahead, Buckley.
Whatever you do, in whatever you do, you need to seek truth with evidence.
Absolutely. And the Bible is about evidence and truth, right? Jesus all the time, you can even say his miraculous ministry was to show people, I'm not just saying these things. So the Bible is about that. Now, clearly, Christianity is more than evidence and rationality, but it's not less than it or against it. Okay? Great point. Right back here. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Yeah, thanks.
What struck me on one of your first slides when you showed the particular form of the argument where they said when you're mature and you consider the evidence, you drop it.
Yes.
The first thing I'd point out with somebody that said that is, what evidence for the claims of Christianity have you considered?
Yes. Like Sammy, let's just go right for the evidence. We can sit here and talk for days about my psychological motivations. You know how difficult it is? Man, this is a rant. Oh, well. It is very difficult to assess someone's motives. It's difficult for me to assess my own sometimes. Women are better at it than men. We call it women's intuition. They tend to be more emotionally attuned. But even women can get addicted to the fact, my mom probably's hit 30% right. She thinks she's 100% right. I get it. Well, you know why she did that? Here's why. You're like, that could be true, but you're only hitting on about 25% with your women's intuition. It's better than mine, which is like 10%. But you know how hard it is to assess someone's motive? That's very difficult to assess somebody's motive. You can look at their actions and work backwards, but it's hard to assess our own sometimes. So I like y'all's approach was like, let's get past motivations. Right? Let's just look at the evidence. This is a rational step of reflection. Obviously, I'm going beyond just the evidence here and saying certain things about God, but I'm not going less than that. So let's just look at it. That's what I'm saying. I think when it comes to, it makes sense to me that this is at least a possible or probable way God might want to communicate for these reasons. So it'd be nice to have somebody with a little bit of humility instead of saying, well, you're just a believer in the invisible bunnies or the leprechauns. Most of humans throughout history have come to a common sense notion there's a higher power. There's something beyond the physical world. So for you to say, well, they're all rubes, they're all grown-up children, you're like, golly, you can think that, but that's astoundingly arrogant. I mean, it might be true, but let's get to the evidence rather than talk about motive. Well, the reason, here's why you want to believe it. You're like, put me on the couch. Let's talk about the evidence, right? Let's try to get some evidence for these sort of things and look at them. So I just wanted to unmask the whole Santa parallel for what it is. It's just a clever way of insulting us. That's okay. They don't have any reason to not insult people. I mean, that's, they're non-believers in a higher power and afterlife. But I just wanted to let you know this particular claim. You don't ever hear these in sophisticated debates. You pick up books, you don't normally get sophisticated anti-believers, non-believers, anti-theists saying these sort of things. Sometimes they'll mention it, but they don't ever put it up as their primary argument, and there's a reason for that. Yeah, go ahead.
He's sitting on Santa's lap,
Okay.
and he pulled his beard down, and there was Grandpa.
There it was. See, that happens sometimes.
You
So,
gotta prove that.
so yeah. So we're and that's the thing. So you gotta each person comes to a different it comes to it in a different way. So I'm glad nobody left here screaming. Yeah. So everybody here is firmly a. There you go. Firmly a disbeliever in that. So any other questions or comments? Yes. Go ahead. Right here, Alex. Go ahead, bud.
I just
And
want to
then-
mention you were talking about Michel Onfray,
Yes.
Michael Onfray,
Yes.
the French atheist.
Yes.
It's interesting that he said that although he doesn't believe in Christianity, that quote unquote, he said Christianity is stronger than death.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he,
Yes.
he said that if Christianity were to be true, it's the only answer that can defeat death.
Yeah, he is extremely jealous of our position on death. And it is Michel Onfray. I did the Americanized version, but he says the Christian view of afterlife is extraordinarily attractive. Is what he said. That's his words, not mine. Extraordinarily attractive. He just wishes it was. I wish it was true. It's not true. So for him, it isn't true. But yeah, he says there's no other religious system, ancient or modern, that matches Christians' view of the afterlife and what it entails, which is really quite an interesting admission from a guy who's one of the best known skeptics on the planet living right now. Somebody else over here? Right here, and then we'll come to Sammy, and then we'll finish.
Well, I just wanted to say my response to somebody who would say to me, oh, you just want to believe because it makes you feel better or whatever. I would say, no. If I didn't believe, I would keep my tithe money and spend it on myself. I would cut off people in traffic. And,
Right.
I would do a lot of things that I don't, I would not be kind to you when
Yes.
you were being mean to me.
Yes. Yes.
There are a lot of things
You're
I do.
you're already ahead of me. That's one of the responses is, this is the last kind of religion you create if it was for comfort. I mean, even with Onfray's admission about the afterlife, there are a whole host of Eastern religions that are far more comfortable. Do what you want. Got good and evil. It's two sides of the same coin, and just kind of flow with the universe. Right? Yeah, you know what I mean. That's far less demanding than Christianity. Far less. Go ahead, Sam.
We have to consider the other side of the coin.
Yes.
One of the biggest evidence of the non-existence of God
Right.
is lack of responsiveness in time.
Yes.
So
Unanswered prayers, what he's talking about. Yeah, I would say hiddenness and problem of evil
Exactly.
are the two biggies. But yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you mentioned something about if I'm 60 and advising a kid at 20.
Yes.
It's believing God in His own way.
Yes.
Not in my own way. But
Huge.
that's-
It's huge. But notice this, God, man, this is a whole thing on hiddenness. Great point, Sammy. Demons believe God exists, right? They have propositional knowledge, data of a true fact that God exists. God doesn't want us to have that kind of knowledge of Him, right? He wants us to come to Him in humility and dependence and in love. That requires not bludgeoning you or giving you everything. Love is a give and take. That also means that there's going to be hiddenness built into this thing, built into it. And mystery. And I'm not just saying that as a get out of jail free card for difficult problems in Christianity. Have you ever noticed too that there's hardly a psychologist on the planet that would deny the claim that humans are built to enjoy discovery? So that's something God's built into us. So He doesn't give us all of it all at once. We tend to devalue things that are common. In fact, you can make an argument the whole idea of something being rare is one of the reasons we value it. So God's got this, right? He's not going to give it all to you. Not going to give you nothing. It's an interesting give and take. We're built for discovery. We love discovering things. That explains some of the hiddenness as well. There's a lot of good reasons. There are good theological. They don't matter when you don't get it, but there are a lot of good theological and logical reasons for why prayer doesn't get answered. But I think you have to address that. It doesn't work like chemistry does, and it doesn't work sometimes like physics. It's not. God isn't a machine like that. And I think the problem when you set up prayer as something like that, God turns into functionally a lottery machine, a cosmic butler, right? It sets people up for be disappointed, right? That you act like prayer can be figured out in that way. Anyway, let's pray. Would you bow with me? Heavenly Father, we love you and thank you for this time. You are good. Your mercies endure forever. Your faithfulness lasts through the generations. We praise you and honor you. We lift our hearts and minds to you. Lord, we look forward to singing prayers to you here in a moment. Oh, Lord, that your name would be made great and that you would be great among us. Lord, bring our heads low if we're haughty and bring our heads high if we're low. We love you and praise you. Jesus, your name be praised. Amen.